Welcome to Chads by Christ. I'm Shali. Deshaun isn't here today. It's for the same reason that we didn't have an episode last week. It's because life has not been giving us a break, and it's just been too difficult to line up our schedules properly. Um, I was busy all week, and the one day I was free to record, Desh wasn't free, and then this week it's more of the same, basically. I'm free to record, Desh isn't. Um, right now, yeah. So to keep the momentum going, I'm just gonna fly solo for a bit. So you're getting half a podcast today, so it'll probably be half as long as a regular episode. Um, on top of all these scheduling issues, I'm doing okay, but I've got a couple of friends who aren't doing too well, and that's weighing on me a bit. And so that's going to influence the topic for today. So before we really get into that, I just want to ask you to pray for my two friends. And if my two friends are listening, you know who you are. I love you. Stay strong. So, on to our topic. It's not going to be the commandments, because again, that'll get back up and running when me and Desh are able to properly sit down and record together, and when things are back on track and back to normal, basically. But I guess what I wanted to talk about is Melancholy. The title of this episode is Melancholy Monologue, and that's exactly what this is going to be. It's SadBoi hours, and I kind of just want to explore that for a bit, and hopefully not be too depressing for all you guys. But yeah, I can't really. This is what's on my mind, and I can't really think of anything better to talk about. So let's just get into it, I suppose. It's tricky not having a co-host. I actually tried to record this yesterday, but because I didn't have Desh around, he wasn't able to tell me that my mic wasn't set up properly, and so a lot of what I said just didn't get picked up, and it was all choppy and weird. Hopefully, this one turns out better, because I'm not doing this again. I can't schedule it. But yeah, so anyway, the other reason it's hard without a co-host is because it's easier to start with a co-host because we can bounce off each other. But I guess just to get the ball rolling, because I'm just talking about, the sad times in general, I might as well be a little bit cringe and quote a song lyric. This lyric is from a song called Mukanjo by a band called Survive, Said the Prophet. And this is a Japanese band, and the song is mostly in Japanese. Mukanjo itself translates to emotionless, I think, according to Google Translate. So we're in for a good time. But this lyric is in English, so there's a bit of English in the song, and this is coherent English. So the lyric goes like this: I've paid my dues, I've sold my soul, so tell me, what is left for me when I've given up everything? So this lyric is this is the lyric that sticks in my head because this is a song I've been listening to a decent amount lately. When you're sad, you tend to listen to sad songs. This is one of my sad songs of choice these days, but I have many others. If you want an artist that's like really good at sad songs, Of Monsters and Men is pretty good. In the sense that they do sad songs. I don't know if that's a good thing, but they do sad songs, and the songs are not like awful to listen to. But anyway, point is this lyric in particular, I find it relatable. I mean, I haven't sold my soul, and I hope no one else has. And I haven't given up everything. Like I'm clearly still at home, at my desk with my fancy microphone and all that jazz, still able to do what I do. But I can still relate, at least in part, to that sentiment of putting a lot of time and energy into something, and even like money, resources, whatever. putting a lot into something and having it fall flat. I think we can all relate to that, and that's certainly not like the only form of sadness, but it's a type of sadness. And I think it's a sadness that comes up a lot, especially in the spiritual life. It's because it's a constant journey, it's a constant pilgrimage, and the end goal seems awfully distant. You know, the end goal is heaven, and that's not going to happen until we die. Um, but then also like accelerating your demise is bad, and that's bad for your spiritual journey. Like the journey is your life fully lived, and life has its ups and downs, and it can feel like you can feel like what you're doing just doesn't have any meaning. And you know, I guess to really like explain what I'm trying to go for, I might as well draw from my own tragic past, I guess. This is my origin story, if you would. No, it's not that bad. But it is something that I poured a lot of time and effort into, and it fell. It pretty much imploded, and I was left with nothing. And I think some of you might be able to relate to this, and this is a romantic relationship. It's actually my first and only romantic relationship, which is a shame that it's a painful memory. But it was 2 years, 2 years ish, 2 or 3 years. I don't really remember because it's been 2 or 3 years since it ended, and this relationship was a difficult one. It was, it had its good parts, but I was insecure, he was insecure, and it just wasn't healthy. And like honestly, looking back, like it's better that it's over, to say the least. But like it was a lot harder to say that, when I did end it. I guess it was easier for me. I don't know how she's feeling because I haven't spoken to her since. There wasn't anything to talk. What it was a sort of breakup where like there was really nothing you could say to each other after that, and so I never pursued a reconnection or anything like that. I hope she's doing well, but yeah, like at the end of that relationship, after all the drama and the ups and downs, not only was I left with this feeling of like heartbreak that something that I was deeply attached to was gone forever, but there was also, because of what the relationship was and how difficult it was and how unhealthy the dynamics were, there was this sense that it never should have happened in the first place, and that was a rough place to be for a while. Just that sort of place of numb despair, because like yeah, I poured so much of myself into this relationship. I poured too much of myself into the relationship to the point where I disconnected from a group of friends that I cared about a lot. I've since been able to reconnect with them, thanks be to God. They welcomed me back. But yeah, just like that feeling of being left with nothing, you know. Like you'd think in the moment that like oh, it's all God's will. God has a plan for you. It'll all work out well in the end. But in times like that, it's really hard to see that. It's really hard to believe that. And I guess to anyone who is going through that right now, like I don't really have any like way to reassure you, because like you're correct, I guess, in that moment that if you were pouring yourself into something and it fell through, like yeah, that it's gone, it's over. What you were hoping to receive, you're not gonna get, and you 9 times out of 10 you're gonna make things worse for yourself if you like cling to a false hope that you're gonna get that thing if you just keep trying harder. But like, and even worse, right, is we say well-meaning friends, like I'm probably guilty of this too, like they'll say stuff like, oh, it's God's will, it's God's plan, chin up, cheer up, like God is looking out for you. He feeds the sparrows and you're worth more than many sparrows and all that sort of thing. But like it's really hard to believe that God is here and looking out for you when you're in the pit of despair and in the pit of despondency. Not despair as in the mortal sin, but like when you're in like the dark place and you look around and everything sucks. I was like, oh, where is God in all this? And I don't know if it's just me or if any of you feel like this too, but it can be easy to be hard on yourself about that and be like, like I'm a child of God, or like I know God loves me, so I'm supposed to be happy, and yet here I am being sad, and here I am like wondering where God is. And that makes me like a bad Catholic or whatever. Um, don't do that. Like I don't want to like impose rules on anyone who's going through it, but like just remember that Jesus on the cross, um, he didn't receive any consolation when he was up there. He's got the nails in his hands and his feet, and he's straight up dying, and he's in all of the pain. And what does he say? He doesn't say, this is all part of God's plan, this is great, or this is all part of God's plan so I can handle it. What does he say? He says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so, like, when we're in the same situation, we're saying the same things, like, that's okay. If anything, like, it's honest, There's no point pretending to God, of all people, that, like, you're feeling okay when you're not. Because God wants you as you really are. He wants a relationship with you as you are. And if you're in the pit, and if you're having a bad day, then he wants you in that bad day. He doesn't want you to, like, put on a brave face for him. I know we can put on a brave face for others, and, like, there are times and places where that's appropriate, right? Like, we don't need to show everyone our wounds. We don't need everyone to bear our burdens for us. No one can bear our burdens for us, but some people can bear them with us. So I pray that all you listeners have those trusted people that you can turn to for support. But yeah, like if you're feeling in the dumps and you feel like you're not sure if God is present, then like that's normal. I don't really have any sort of cure, like I can't take the pain away. Me and my little microphone, I can't really do much for you. But I guess I can read you a quote from C.S. Lewis that I always keep in mind in times like that. It's from his book, The Screwtape Letters. And so the Screwtape Letters, for those who don't know, is a series of letters from a senior demon to a junior demon, basically trying to give this junior advice on how to tempt people away from virtue into sin and drag them to hell, basically. But because of the nature of the job, like, it ends up, if you invert the meanings where you need to, you end up learning a lot of good spiritual insights because of the nature of the job, basically. Anyway, the quote that I cling to in times of difficulty and darkness from this book is this. God wants them to learn to walk, and must therefore take away his hand. And if only the will to walk is really there, he is pleased even with their stumbles. Do not be deceived, Wormwood. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending, to do our enemy's will, looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he has been forsaken, and still obeys. So that sounds like cold comfort, It's when you're in the pit, like, yeah, God has withdrawn a little bit, right? Earlier in this like chapter, Screwtape's talking about how initially when you start your spiritual journey, God is really close to you. You can feel his presence and everything's great, and you're having all these religious experiences and things like that. Maybe you've even seen a miracle or two. Who knows? But as you go further along, God seems to get more and more distant until you reach this point where it seems like he's gone altogether. And what this section of the book is pretty much saying is that these are the moments where your virtues become real. This section in particular is really about the virtue of faith, because when you've got all the happy feelings and you're feeling good, it's easy to do the good things. It's easy to go to church when you're not depressed. But when it's no longer appealing, when everything sucks, to keep on pursuing the Lord is like as genuine an act of faith as you can do. And so in a weird sense, like it's during the times of desolation that like the desolation is the time where you really, like I've said before, like it's where you really exercise faith. And what that means in practice is that, you know, when you're having a bad time, it doesn't mean that God is angry at you, and it doesn't mean that God's withdrawn you from you because he's punishing you necessarily. This is assuming you haven't sinned, right? Like, if you've got sin weighing on you, then go to confession, get that cleared out. But like, you know, be aware that like going to confession while you do receive grace isn't gonna like, it's not a magic happy pill, right? You're still gonna feel down if life sucks. And it's in these difficulties where your virtue is really put to the test, because this is where you have nothing but your will to propel your actions. And so this is where the rubber hits the road, basically, which is cold comfort in a way. You know, like I know it's not, what's the word? Like, it's cold comfort. It's not pleasant, you know, because all I've really said is like everything sucks, but you still got to do what you got to do. And that's true too. That, you know, that is true to an extent, but I don't mean to be like, you know, chin up, buttercup, pick yourself up by the bootstraps. Facts don't care about your feelings or anything like that. It's more that I don't really know how to explain it beyond. I mean, we're called to pick up the cross and follow the Lord, right? The Lord tells us, like, anyone who calls himself my disciple has to pick up his cross, follow me. And like, where does the way of the cross lead? It leads to the crucifixion. And the crucifixion sucks. All right, like, you know, we can say that it's great because it saved us, but like, in and of itself, being crucified is awful, and it's terrible, right? And the rough parts of life are like that. They're awful. They're terrible. But like we go through them with faith, right? We stay oriented towards God because we hope in the resurrection. And the resurrection isn't like a resurrection of what died, right? To draw from, you know, to go back to my relationship story, history part, whatever. To go back to like what happened to me with my relationship that ended. You know, like I was thinking that all of it was for nothing and it never should have happened. What was the point of these 2 years? Those 2 years of relationship revealed to me my insecurities. They revealed to me my weaknesses. That relationship, because I cared about this girl, like that was what galvanized me to properly try to get my act together and get sobriety from porn. And I'm now like 2 years clean. And so those 2 years, like, sure, I didn't get married, but they weren't useless. But I can only see these silver linings now. That, you know, like I can only see these silver linings looking back, and that's how it's going to be for everyone, for like any sort of suffering, right? We're not going to be able to see how the crucifixion leads to the resurrection until we've gone through the crucifixion and have been resurrected. So again, like that's sort of trying to like spiritualize it with, oh, it'll turn out well in the end. Oh, it's all in God's plan. Oh, he has good plans for you. Like that always rings hollow to the person in the trenches, because it's, in a weird way, like at that time, it simply isn't true. It will be, but not yet. And so what are we meant to do for our friends who are going through rough times? I mean, people say things like empathy. People say things like, you know, there's I think like controversial figure, Christopher West, who says like misericordiae. It's not even him. It's just like the meaning of misericordiae, which is the Latin form of mercy. What that like directly translates to is to suffer with, roughly. That's really all you can do, right? You know, Job's friends in the Book of Job, they, like, none of what they say was anything of value to Job, but they spent 7 days before that just sitting with him in his suffering in silence, and that probably meant more to Job than any of what they said. Because if you've read the Book of Job, then you know that none of what they say is helpful to the poor guy. And I guess to keep with the theme of the Bible and sort of sidestep a little bit, that idea of futility comes up also in the book of Exodus, or like Exodus Numbers. Those of you doing Bible in a year, we're currently we've just left Egypt basically, and so the Israelites have started their wanderings in the desert, and the desert sucks. It's the desert. There's no food. There's no water. There's no nothing. The people keep crying out why did you take us out here just to die, just to suffer? It was better back in Egypt with our sins, because at least there we had the flesh pots and the meat, and it was nice and it felt good even though we were slaves. And so the trough periods are a lot like that. You're sort of just wandering aimlessly, and all you can really do is follow the Lord, and the Lord typically doesn't tell you where he's leading you, and it sucks, and it's dry, and you kind of wish you had nice food and water to drink, but you don't. You're in the desert, and you got to get through the desert to get to the promised land, and you have to just trust the Lord and go where he's leading you. But that's hard, that's hard. This is a bit rambly. Sorry about that. Again, it's hard having a co-host to keep me in line and to springboard off of. But what else can we talk about the sad house? I'll revisit this topic. Me and Desh will revisit this topic in more detail properly, because there's a lot to unpack. Especially with Lent coming up. The whole wandering in the desert theme comes up in Lent a lot. Suffering has a redemptive quality to it, but that's a different topic altogether. That is another form of spiritual bypass, though. I really do dislike those platitudes of, it's God's will, it's God's plan. Don't worry, God has a plan for you. Your suffering can be redemptive. That's all true, but none of it's helpful. All that's ever really, I try to unite my suffering to the Lord on the cross, because the Lord at the crucifixion took on all human suffering on himself, and I try to do that, with varying degrees of success. It's worth a try, it's not going to take the pain away. I think that's the issue I have with it, is if you approach this idea of redemptive suffering, you have to approach it knowing full well that you are going to suffer. It's your suffering that is redemptive. It's not like you give the suffering to Jesus and he takes it from you and you don't suffer and he does. It's you in your suffering are cooperating with Christ in his suffering. And he does take on the bulk of your suffering. He takes on your suffering, but you suffer with him, and so you suffer, and it sucks. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is mistaken, in my opinion, if that has any weight. I haven't even touched on how to suffer. I mentioned that I used to be a pornography user, and pornography and other types of addictive behaviors like drugs and alcohol are pretty primary ways of avoiding suffering and running away from it. One of the best resources that I found for getting off of porn was a podcast called Husband Material. You can find it on Spotify and maybe on the other podcast platforms. But Husband Material operates on all of its episodes, all its teaching and what have you, is based on the core premise is that porn is a pacifier. The thing a baby sucks on to not cry. Because that is what it is, right? you look at porn, you masturbate, you get that like intense flush of dopamine, and it feels good. But like, why do I want to feel good? It's because I'm trying. It's because I don't want to feel bad. Um, and so what ends up happening is what ended up happening for me, and what ends up happening for a lot of guys, just based on all the reading I've done, all the podcasts I've listened to, and everything that I've learned during my recovery journey is like especially when porn starts when you're a kid, because that's how it started for me. It started when I was 12, 11. Is when you're a kid, you don't learn how to deal with suffering. You're a kid, you don't know any better. But you find this addictive behavior. You find porn, you find drugs, you find alcohol. Maybe you find maybe even like more benign, quote unquote, addictive behaviors like food or exercise even. You find something that feels good to numb out or like to like paste on top of the suffering that you're going through. What that ends up doing though is it ends up leaving those wounds unaddressed. And so you go through your entire life feeling miserable. You go through your entire life suffering and you're just trying to paper it over with the pleasure. And the pleasure has diminishing returns. And not only does it have diminishing returns, but more often than not, you feel awful for relying on it. And a lot of this is subconscious, but a lot of this is also like pretty clear as day, pretty simple. Then like everything I've just said can be summed up. Not everything I've just said, but like that cycle, because you use the addictive behavior, you get ashamed, and then that shame is extra pain that you numb out with the addictive behavior. Like that's a concept that like can be presented to a child's understanding, right? Another favorite book of mine is The Little Prince by, pardon my butchered French, by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I hope I said that right. I didn't, but so this is a children's book. It's a book for children. It's about a little prince. He lives on an asteroid and he journeys through the stars and he comes to Earth, and it's just his adventure. And it's this little prince who's a child encountering adults and all their weird quirks. And one of the adults he meets is an alcoholic. And so I'm just going to read that passage out because it's everything I've already said, but it's presented so clearly and simply. The next planet was inhabited by a drinker. This visit was very short, but it plunged the little prince into a deep melancholy. "What are you doing there?" he said to the drinker, whom he found settled silently before a collection of empty bottles and a collection of full bottles. "I'm drinking," said the drinker with a mournful air. "Why are you drinking?" asked the little prince. "To forget," replied the drinker. "To forget what?" inquired the little prince, who was already starting to feel sorry for him. "To forget that I'm ashamed," confessed the drinker, hanging his head. "Ashamed of what?" persisted the little prince, who wanted to help him. "Ashamed of drinking," concluded the drinker, retreating into permanent silence. And the little prince went away, perplexed. "Grown-ups are decidedly very, very odd," he said to himself as he continued on his voyage. So yeah, everything I just said, right? Addictive behaviors are a way to escape suffering, but the only way to really deal with suffering is to face it head on, right? You can't get to the resurrection unless you go through the cross. And so you have to face your suffering down, and you have to be honest about that. You have to be honest that it is suffering. So again, spiritual bypassing, trying to like make it pious and hoo-ha feel good, overly religious, what have you. It can backfire because you don't go through the suffering and you don't go through the healing that you need to because you put on this pious act. And again, like I'm not trying to like dismiss the doctrine or like I don't know if it's a doctrine or not. Dash isn't around to correct me, so I'm getting everything wrong. But like, yeah, uniting your suffering to Christ on the cross is a real thing. But again, you have to do the suffering, and it's cold comfort. But it's the same cold comfort that Christ received at Gethsemane. There's another of C.S. Lewis's essays. I can't remember which one it is now, but I think it's about like prayer and why prayer isn't always granted. because it's about Jesus' prayer at Gethsemane where he says, Father, take this cup away from me. Because, he's about to get crucified, and what does he pray for? He doesn't say, this is your will, Pog, let's go. He says, Father, take this cup away from me. Not my will, but your will be done. So, even in his suffering, he's still trusting and pursuing the Lord, that God, his Father. You know what I mean? But, he still asks for relief, and that relief isn't given to him. What he gets is an angel, and most translations will say that the angel comforted him. Lewis says that the Greek word that gets translated to comforted more accurately means strengthened. It's not like the angel came to Jesus and like patted him on the back and said, there, it's going to be okay. It's more like the angel came and like held him to account almost. Like all the angel really did was, all the angel probably could have done or would have done is like, put a hand on his shoulder and said like, hey, I know you're afraid, I know you're struggling, but you have to do this. And that's cold comfort. And it's the same cold comfort that I've been saying this whole time. But it's the cold comfort that's gotten me as far as I've gotten. Like I can't deny that I haven't grown. I can't, like I've grown a lot since that relationship. But it took effort. It took the pain of all of that, like I had to face it down, and I had to continue to face it down as best I could. And I probably haven't even done that good of a job. And I still have a lot more work to do. But yeah, like it's melancholy, like I have a tendency to melancholy because I don't want to run away from my suffering anymore because of everything that I've done in the past couple of years. But that's really like all I have for now is if you're going through it, stay strong, take courage, but don't run away from it. Reach out for support, but don't run away. Which, yeah, like that just sounds awful. I'm so sorry. And I guess on that dour note, I'll probably just leave it here. Actually went longer than I expected to, which is good. Hopefully it sounds good, because again, I'm not recording this again. I don't have the time to. As far as prayer intentions are concerned, pray for my friends who are going through a rough time. Pray for any of your friends who are going through a rough time. If you're going through a rough time, pray for yourself. Like be honest with God, right? Like so many of the Psalms are straight up like pain, cries of pain, right? My God, why have you abandoned me? That's Jesus quoting Psalm 22. And like, that's it's a pretty sad psalm. It's not a happy thing at all. And then you've got an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations. Like suffering is a part of the human condition, which is awful enough. But like, be real with God in your suffering. Tell him that you're suffering, and don't try to like look good for him. And don't try to like do it all on your own. Find friends to support you. Find friends to suffer with you. Because that's what a friend is for. So yeah, prayer intentions. Pray for my friends. Pray for your friends. Pray for yourself. Pray for courage and strength. Pray for an end to the conflicts in Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, and pray for me. Yeah, pray for me. Pray for Dash, and pray that the next episode will be a bit more happier. Yeah, I'm really sorry about this, but again, you can't escape it. So it's important to face these things head on. I wish you all the best. Thanks so much for listening. I hope to catch you in the next one. God bless.